Okay, students, here we go, chapter 39.2, Decolonization in Africa. But before we begin that, we got to go back to finish up the one thing on the Palestine-Israeli conflict. So, anyways, this is a hotbed of contention. Let me go back to the map for just a second. So here's this area, okay, and this is a contested area. So take a look at the map carefully, and you'll blow it up right now, okay, and you'll see lots and lots of issues with this stuff. Number one, the two groups hate each other. Like I said, the Jews were promised the land by the British. Okay, the Palestinians were promised the land by the British during World War I and World War II, and then that they would get the land and stuff like that. So the Jews move in there, started in 1870s, but really in 1930s, and then into right after World War II, and that's when it creates tension. So take it, Israel after the UN partition in 47, Israel after war 48, 49. As soon as they get started, there's a war, and they take even more territory. Okay, and then occupied by Israel after Six-Day War in 67. We'll get to that one because that was a big one in near conflict. And occupied by Israel after the October War in 1973. So they take this little area here and this slip over here. This is so they can control the Suez Canal and say, hey, no, you have to listen to us because if not, we'll have issues. And then this big area, the Sinai Peninsula, is returned to Egypt back in 78 as kind of a tentative, let's make peace and not get so angry with each other. This little thing that juts out right here is Jerusalem, and this thing is the West Bank. This is the area where there's tons of problems right now, as well as this one in Gaza Strip that's given back to Israel for Palestinian settlement. But the Israelis have an issue with that because they want to control that. They want to see what's going on. So that's where it's at today. So I'll go back to what we're going to finish up. So in Israel, this guy named Gamal Abdel Nasser takes over the leadership of Egypt, and he's also going to be the most prominent group of the Arab nations at this time. There's a lot of significance. Egypt's the most wealthiest of the Arab states at that time, number one, because they have an economy that's actually working compared to the other ones, which are kind of stagnant. And he takes over, he tries to take the Suez Canal, but they're not going to let them take it. Okay, number one, France, Great Britain, and Israel go to fight him. But then into this steps in the United States, they say, hey, you're not allowed to do that. Okay, we're control the area, and that's when Britain pretty much gets set in its place as you are no longer a world power. Okay, and they essentially hold the Suez Canal, and they tentatively give it to Egypt with temporary control, meaning the U.S. can step in. Okay, this causes problems. Next thing, in 1967, Israel's attacked again. It's a threatened invasion of Israel in 1967. Israel launches a preemptive strike. So they're going to be, they said, we're going to attack you, and there's a coalition set up from Syria, Egypt, and Jordan, to attack him. So Israel says, what the heck, we're just going to attack him. They start to attack her, and they take the offensive. And they're well prepared and well armed, thanks in part mainly to the United States, who becomes friend with them because they're looking for a friend in the region. And the other ones had been taken by French and British mandate, so this is going to be their thing. They conquer and take over all of Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, the area that kind of protects Jerusalem, and they also conquer the Sinai Peninsula area from Egypt. And later on, it's going to be returned in a peace treaty, but it sets up this contentious arrangement for this area. All right, so back to what we needed to finish today, 39.2, Decolonization in Africa. Hopefully we'll get this one in. So here's this map. When you take a look at your book, take a look at all these areas that are going to win independence of some sort in the dates. And you'll find that most of them happened in 1960. It's the year of freedom. Okay? And these are areas that are controlled by the Europeans. Remember the scramble for empire back in the 1870s, 75 to 1900s, where all of Africa is going to be taken over by European powers except for the two states. So decolonization, legacy of colonial competition, where these groups are trying to strive to take over territory and possession of areas, whether it's worth it to them or not. It's just I have it and you don't was part of the elements. Well, with this, when they come in here, when the Europeans come in here, they go across any tribal or ethnic or linguistic or religious parameters. In other words, an area that's settled by the Europeans is going to be controlled by the Europeans in their way, and they could care less for these other things that might separate these people. So when they force them into a group, it's not really a group that they decide or they want. It's a group that's convenient for the Europeans. This is going to cause issues later on because And a place like Nigeria or a place like Kenya is not one unified people, but rather a whole bunch of different groups who used to be for a long time in tribal arrangements, and so it's going to be a hard time to break this habit or this condition or this idea of thinking that I'm not Kenyan, I'm, you know, Mau Mau. I'm not Kenyan, I'm Kikuyu or something, which I think might be the same tribe anyways. France and North Africa, for the most part, this is a weird thing. This is kind of this helter-skelter of Europeans where some territories they let go and other territories they don't. So there is some reasoning behind it, and I'll explain it when we get to some of the stuff, though. For the most part, France lets go of their territories, starting with Morocco and Tunisia. They let them gain independence in 1960, but this one place, Algeria, they don't let go. Okay, this is one of the reasons is there's quite a few French settlers in this area. Remember settler colonies? You have to remember that. So there's some French people who have moved into this area, and they're demanding that France protects them from any independence movement by these people and maintain it as a colony. Okay. Well, this brings in the French and the military, and they're trying to restore their status of where they used to be and no longer are now, back with World War II. 2 million French citizens are born or settled in Algeria by World War II, and they're going to fight to maintain it. This causes contention, and it's part of the liberation movement that's going to exist in Africa. And so we'll see how this plays out now. Okay. The Algerian War for Liberation or Independence is going to be fought by the FLN, or the Front de Libération Nationale. Okay. They start a guerrilla war, and it's always a guerrilla war when the group you want is fighting against someone else. Oh, those nasty people, or they're shooting at us from behind trees or tanks or stuff like that, or trees or rocks, excuse me, and then running away instead of fighting up front. Well, remember, it was the Americans that did this as well. So back in 1776. So it's a smart move because the guys have better weapons than you. You do not want to be out in the open where they can shoot you. Instead, shoot from behind something, run away, and bug the snot of them. And the lesson's well learned from many, many wars, but in particular American Revolution, where you don't have to win the battles, you just have to annoy the snot out of them so they get frustrated, tired, and get so fed up spending all the money and time and effort that they leave. Excuse me, sorry, that might be loud. So in 1954, the Front de Liberation is founded and begins a guerrilla war where they're going to attack certain groups, segments of French control within Algeria. Finally, they're going to end up with the repercussions standard where the French go and they massacre situations of other people. And then now France looks bad because how can you say you're fighting to protect French people when you're massacring villages and towns like that? So by 1958, there's going to be 500,000 French soldiers in this area trying to control the area. But once again, it just sets the example. It's too hard to control. When they want to cause chaos, they can cause chaos, and then they just disappear. And because they get blended into the society they're in, it's too hard to monitor. And it sets up the pattern for how these revolutions are going to be fought. And then, I always get with the one kid, why don't they just wipe them all out? That's just not what you want to do. So the war ends with Algerian independence in 1962. And then one thing I want to mention is that this guy named Frantz Fanon, who wrote a book about the wretched earth, who talks about the colonial rule in Africa, but in particular in North Africa, and he justifies that, hey, at sometimes it's okay to use violence to attain what you need to, in particular independence. And then he cites in there, guess who? That's right, America. So once again, when it's for your side, in your favor of it, it's a revolution. When it's against you, okay, it's an insurrection. Ooh, those evil insurrectors. Okay. Excuse me again. So with this coincides with what's going on in the rest of the world, in particular in the United States. In the late 1950s, early 1960s, and into the 70s, there's this effort for Black Power, Black is Beautiful, started by Malcolm X. Kind of started by Martin Luther King, but also emphasized by Malcolm X. That it's okay to be black. You should be black and proud, and it's okay. And so this kicks into what's called the negritude movement that's going to kick into Africa, where African stuff is good, where they've gone through this colonial power control by Europeans, and they've been viewed as anything that's African is bad and only European stuff is good. Well, now it's kind of the switch sides, and it's okay to have, an African name, and it's okay to dress in African style. So this is the negritude movement, and we want to get away from the colonialism stuff. Okay, parts of it deals with the reaffirmation of what's called African civilization. Remember, it's not like they're dumb; it's just that they were not unified and overtaken. Some of this kicks into the idea that socialism, because tribes are socialists, they are communists in the sense. So when they want to go back to a tribal existence, they want to go to a big family that takes care of each other. So yes, there is some communist element in it. Do they want to install communism throughout? Probably not. They're probably not hooked up with the communist movement, but that's enough for America to be piqued in interest and to make sure that it goes kind of in their way, which is non-communist. So this kicks into what we call the geopolitical implications. Excuse me for clearing my throat so much. The geopolitical implications, it might have been double because I just caught up, in that it's an emphasis of the Cold War. Either you're with the United States or you're with the USSR, and if you tend towards go to communist, well, you're against the U.S., and the U.S. has got to try to stop that. Part of containment theory, part of domino theory. We'd hate to see all of Africa go communist. That would be terrible for America, so they have to get involved, okay? Or Western European as well. The post-independence difficulties, because of Africa's situation, because they've been colonized for a while, they're going to have a hard time getting into gear and getting caught up. Okay? There was a Pax Romana of sorts when the Europeans were in control, but it was kind of repressive, okay, where things in control. There wasn't much disturbance, well, because the Europeans didn't allow it. Disturbance would have been independence movements. As soon as that happens, much of Africa kicks into independence and then into tribal conflicts. That's epitomized in Rwanda, Burundi, and Angola. In Rwanda in particular, the Hutus and the Tutsis fight each other for a long time. They'll kick in chapter 40. We'll see them again. And then lots of economic hardship, because with the European withdrawal, they also take away their their involvement as far as financial, not contributions, but financial funding of certain events, and not events, of items. Okay, so no more bringing in money to build things. So Africa's going to have to figure out a way to deal with that stuff. So it's an immediate hit to what's going on in the economy. Okay, this creates instability within the new governments because things are not going good. Well, when things are not going good, people want to change in government. Afrocentrism is pushed by Kwame Nkrumah. He's the leader of Ghana, and he kind of represents this idea that African is good, and perhaps we should form an African coalition, going back to the Black Power movement, going back to the Africa for African movements. Okay, and then it kind of represents this idea that they can develop their own stuff. So Ghana is one of the first to get kind of more of a bigger status or more importance. Okay, and affirmation of Ghanese independence and equality. So in your book, you see a picture of the Queen and the African leader Nkrumah together at the same level. That would have been unheard of. The Queen would have always been elevated her picture higher than the rest. Okay, well, now they're equal. So there's Nkrumah at some sort of celebration of some sorts. Notice an African dress style. That is part of Afrocentrism or negritude. Okay, and then in Kenya, this is a typical example. This is another one of the weird ones where the British let Ghana go, no problem, but they don't let Kenya go. Well, this is because not much of Kenya, but great tracts of land in Kenya have been taken by the white settlers in this area, and they don't want to give it up. So they say, we want to be protected by the British government. Well, the Kikuyu, once again, if you go back to a couple chapters, the Kikuyu are the group that got their land stolen by the white settlers, the best land taken away from them, and now they want it back, and they've always wanted it back, and they don't want to just allow the British to take care. So there's sometimes these groups called collaborationists, okay, that the the Kikuyu or the Mau Mau later on see as Africans who are helping out the British. They start to attack them and start to attack other peoples in the push for independence and a push for reprisal to try to scare them. Okay, the Mau Mau start to become notorious throughout Europe for doing assassinations, fighting resistance, and also attacking Europeans just because they're Europeans. They're easy to spot. They're white. And then they're soon called communists because anyone who's fighting against a Western power must be a commie. And this is part of Cold War effects, so everything's kicking into here. In 1952, a state of emergency is declared, and the British come in with tons of troops, and they kill lots of people, lots of Africans, and only a couple of Europeans die. So the end result is it's bloody warfare, and then eventually Kenya does get its independence, but at a cost, and by 1963 they're an independent country. The tarnishing of the independence, because one of the turmoil, because they're unstable, and because economically things are not certain, okay, this creates chaos and creates lots of instability, and it creates a situation where generals can take over in coups, which is going to be endemic of Africa.